Bonjour tout le monde. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this press conference on the Canada-European Union trade. With us today, we have the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development, Mary Ng, welcome, as well as the European Commission Executive Vice President, Valdis Dombrovskis. So we will be taking remarks and then we will go to questions. So, sir, go ahead.
Well, thank you so very much. Bonjour tout le monde. Thrilled that we could be here. And it's wonderful to be here with my good friend and colleague from the European Union in Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Let me begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And for those of us who are settlers or immigrants to Canada, it's important to recognize that Indigenous peoples were the keepers of this land and that we all have a role to play in reconciliation. It is really terrific to welcome you, Valdis, and indeed your delegation from the European Union to Ottawa today. This year is the 5th anniversary of CETA, and we just held our annual joint committee meeting to take stock of the benefits of CETA. And there is one thing that is absolutely clear. CETA is working. Since 2017, when CETA was launched, our trade has grown between Canada and Europe by 34%. This means $100 billion in trade that has flowed between Canada and the EU just last year. Our trade relationship has grown by over a third, and this is substantial because trade with the European Union is in fact also growing faster than our other trade agreements or arrangements with other economies. And in last year alone, I was heartened when I learned this, when we got the report, that for Canadian businesses, they saved nearly $890 million in duties, which really is helpful for Canadian businesses to help them be more competitive. And that's another example of how this is working. But there is a line that I wanted to draw, or one element in the reporting that we received that I thought was really terrific, and that is around environmental goods in particular. Canada's exports to the EU has increased by over 40% in environmental goods. And in our conversation today, Valdis called our trade agreement one of the greenest in the world. And I think if you take a look at that particular trade line, it is a proof point that our commitment to fighting climate change and building a greener economy is certainly taking place between Canada and the European Union. Canada and the EU are leading the green transition, working together to build and strengthen our energy supply chains, creating good jobs for workers on both sides of the Atlantic. And in fact, we saw this in action yesterday when the EVP and I were able to visit a Canadian clean tech company in Nano One, just outside of Montreal. Nano One makes high-performance cathode powders used in lithium-ion batteries, which in turn can be used in everything from electric vehicles to grid storage batteries. And what's more, Nano One already has partnership agreements with many of the big European companies, including Volkswagen and BASF. Many of you know, of course, that Canada has all of the necessary critical minerals to build electric vehicles, and that critical minerals will indeed be important to our transition to a greener economy and essential to meeting our net zero goals by 2050. And working together with close partners like the European Union, this will secure our economic futures now. And indeed, I would say it's even more critical that we do that now more than ever. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine has disrupted the world order, increased food insecurity around the world, caused energy prices to skyrocket, and undermine the international rules-based order. Canada and EU must work together, and indeed, we have been working together. I will remind all of us that it was only in August where we welcomed Chancellor Scholz from Germany here to Canada, where we looked at the opportunity to build a more secure energy future together, but also one that is green. Strengthening the supply chain, the energy supply chains between Canada and the EU will reaffirm Canada as a secure and reliable energy partner for Europe. And speaking of Germany, great news out of Berlin yesterday. Germany has taken the next step towards ratification of CETA. This is great news for Canadian and German businesses and exporters who I know are looking to grow this important relationship. And we continue to work expeditiously and constructively with the EU on the joint interpretive statement to support Germany's full ratification. And right now, as we speak, my colleague, Minister Champagne, is in Germany attracting investments to support this important relationship. So CETA indeed helps Canada and the EU become that truly dynamic duo. But we are more than just bilateral partners. We collaborate on the multilateral stage as well. We're both members of the Ottawa Group, of course, which Canada chairs, working on important issues like the reform at the WTO and strengthening our multilateral trading system. And maybe one final point I would make is that as we were taking stock of this relationship between Canada and the European Union, one of the things that is very heartening to me, particularly as Canada's trade minister, but also the small business minister, is that one of the main drivers of growth we've seen is the expansion of small and medium-sized businesses taking advantage of this opportunity both ways. And in fact, even more encouraging is to hear a report where majority-owned businesses by women is making the EU one of the most important destinations for women-owned businesses growing in the international marketplace. So with that, it's terrific to be here with you, Valdis. May we continue to grow this friendship and this important economic relationship between Canada and the European Union. And with that, I will turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon. Bonjour, everyone. Well, I'm delighted to be here in Ottawa. This morning, Minister Ng and I had the pleasure of co-chairing the third CETA joint committee meeting. We celebrated the important milestone of CETA's 5th anniversary. And we also celebrated the fact that just yesterday, the German Bundestag has fully endorsed CETA. Germany is Europe's largest economy, so this is indeed a major milestone. This shows that our European approach, while it may be gradual, is a right one. We can say with confidence that CETA is a success. Bilateral trade between EU and Canada has increased more than 1/3 since 2017, with growth both in goods and services, and that even despite the pandemic. And as Mr. Ng just said, we are not stopping here. CETA has a massive potential to grow our trade links even further. It can be a driver for green and just economic growth, which is a priority for us both. Already, bilateral trade in environmental goods grew by 27% in 2021. But the value of our cooperation goes far beyond economic gains. CETA is drawing us closer as strategic allies and global partners. This matters because we are operating in a changing and volatile geopolitical environment. Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine and its wider global consequences is reinforcing the importance of trust and shared values. Let me say for the record that the EU is enormously grateful for Canada's unwavering support for Ukraine. You have shown yourself as a true friend in a time of need. And now we need to knuckle down and do even more to help Ukraine win this war. Because winter is here and Russia's escalation is targeting vital civilian infrastructure. Many Ukrainians are being left without water, heat, electricity as winter is beginning. We are reaching the critical moment of this conflict. Russia's aggression is forcing us to think hard about vital issues like building secure and resilient supply chains, avoiding dangerous dependencies, and deepening ties with reliable partners. The EU and Canada have strong interest in developing mutually beneficial cooperation in areas like energy security, green technologies, and raw materials. There are numerous win-win outcomes within the reach. In this respect, our strategic partnership on raw materials can be transformative. We'll also continue to develop our strong partnership at multilateral level, particularly on WTO reform, because we share the belief that global rules are needed more than ever. So we'll work with like-minded partners to make positive progress. We also share strong concerns on the political direction of the United States Inflation Reduction Act. We believe this runs a real risk of global subsidies race, which will benefit no one and would actually slow our green transformations. We are open for constructive discussions with our US partners, but we need to find real and workable solutions. Thank you, Marie, for the warm welcome and for the excellent discussions we have today. And I guess we are open to your questions.
Questions there are. So just a reminder for people on Zoom, if you do have a question, please use the raise hand function so I can recognize you. But as usual, we will start in the room, starting with Murad Hamadi from The Logic.
I hope this is working. Ministering, the Biden administration has once again expressed concern about Canada's proposed digital services tax, as well as Bills C11 and C18. In the past, it's hinted at retaliatory trade action if your government goes ahead with these measures. The EU has managed to avoid conflict with the US over the Digital Markets Act, and at least for now, settled the dispute over digital services trade. So what's the EU doing that Canada isn't?
Well, Murad, thank you so much for that question. And I had an opportunity, of course, to speak to my U.S. counterpart just earlier this week. On the digital services tax, we've been clear about this. Our commitment to Canadians is, of course, tax fairness. But what we've been able to do with the United States and indeed with all of our partners in the OECD is come to a multilateral agreement. And that multilateral agreement has until 2024 to come into effect. What we have said here is that should that multilateral agreement not work, then Canada will impose a digital services tax if the multilateral agreement doesn't work. But we are very, very committed to working with the United States, just as we did, by the way, in coming together on a multilateral solution at the OECD. And as I said, we have until 2024. So we're going to work very hard and focused on ensuring that that multilateral solution is there. And then with respect to the other bills that are before Parliament right now, I reiterated to my colleague that that our legislation is in keeping with our trade obligations. We take trade obligations and our commitments very seriously. And I reassured that that our bills indeed are in keeping with our trade obligations.
Commissioner, you've emphasized the importance of upholding GDPR in the EU's trade agreements and the importance of data protection. Canada's consumer privacy law is now 20 years old, and we haven't managed to pass a new one. Have you discussed data protections and Canada's adequacy status with your counterparts on this trip?
Well, actually, we're not discussing the data protection issues in a bilateral context. We were today focusing indeed on CETA implementation and on the next steps. But we were discussing more globally the data flows and the data protection issues in a context of e-commerce negotiations in the WTO. Where I would say we broadly share the views how we should be approaching those issues internationally.
Okay. Mari Wolf, Globe and Mail.
Yeah, hi. Further to what my colleague just asked, with regard to your conversation about Catherine Tai, which you just alluded to, you said that you believe that Bill C18 and Bill C11 were compliant with our trade obligations, but that's not what she was saying. She, I believe, was expressing concern that they could breach CUSMA obligations. I mean, could you go into some more detail about what the discussion entailed and, you know, their concerns? I mean, how did you address them?
Thank you, Marika. It's nice to see you. what I did was, as I said, I reassured the USTR that our commitment, Canada's commitment to compliance with trade obligations, is one that we take seriously. And of course, these bills are making their way through Parliament. I also talked to her about the importance of the freedom of the press and how important independent journalism was. And online news is about making sure the strength of Canadian democracy, and in fact democracies, is extremely important, and we share that as Canada and the United States. And the one bill is indeed about ensuring that our content creators, our journalists, are compensated for the work that they do. But that was the nature of the conversation. But again, the point that I wanted to make, the point that I made to her, which I will make to Canadians as well. Canada, as a trading country, one who upholds the rules of trade, is also one that ensures that the work that we do will indeed be compliant to our trade obligations.
Companies in the shape of Google and Facebook will be unfairly targeted. And are you concerned at all that this may prompt retaliatory tariffs? Was that raised at all?
It was not. But I would also say that in a relationship as big as the one between Canada and the United States, where we trade in trillions, there are going to be issues. And we welcome the ability to work as like-minded countries that work on a trading system where we have mechanisms also to deal with issues that we may not see eye to eye on, and to use those mechanisms appropriately. But in a relationship as large as the one between Canada and the United States, I think overall things are going very well, and trade is flowing to the benefit of our workers and to our communities and to our people. But of course, there are going to be issues, and this is today. This is one of them, and I'm confident that we will need to work through them with our trading partner.
Okay, going on Zoom now. We will start with Dylan Robertson from the Canadian Press.
Hi there. Thanks for taking our questions. A question for both Minister Ng and the Commissioner. Germany has finally ratified CETA after some longstanding concerns with the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism. I'm wondering if you could please explain how you both managed to circumvent that concern, and if there's any template that you can apply to some of the states that haven't ratified.
Hi, Dylan. It's great to hear from you. Let me begin by reiterating what both the EVP and I said, and that is, it is really positive that that CETA was ratified in the Bundestag yesterday, and I think this really underscores the importance of the relationship between between Germany and Canada, but of course the European Union and Canada. We are going to, we're going to work together, Canada and the European Union, to be sure that we will what's called a joint interpretive statement. But we're working on this in such a way that will support Germany's full ratification. But I want to thank my colleagues in Germany, and I want to thank colleagues in the European Union who have been working very hard with Germany, but I also know that they're working very hard with all of the member states to ensure that we get to full ratification. This is something that the EVP and I talk about, and indeed we're committed to working on together.
This investment protection question, indeed, Mr. Ng already mentioned that we are working on a joint interpretive statement dealing exactly with those investment protection issues, clarifying countries' right to regulate, avoiding excessively broad interpretation of things like indirect expropriation, for example. And in this way, we will address the concern of Germany, and it must be said it's not limited to Germany. This concern is in quite a few EU member states, and I would say also among the stakeholders. In a sense, there is a difficult prehistory with investor-to-state arbitrations and interpretations which sometimes were too broad, taken by the arbitrators. So clearly, it's already, to the extent addressed in our CETA agreement as it's formulated. But I think this additional interpretative statement will provide further reassurances.
Thank you. And Minister, I wanted to know if you agree with the Commissioner in his statement just now that global subsidies race from the IRA is going to benefit nobody and will hamper the green transformation.
Well, Dylan, I think that the Executive Vice President and I find lots of things in agreement with, particularly because we've been talking about CETA and how well it works. Canada and the United States, and indeed the European Union, we're all committed to do what we're all committed to fighting climate change, and we're all committed to creating an economy that enables those innovations and those clean technologies and the range of investments that need to be made in, to get us onto that net zero path and commitment by 2050. So, so there is much work that we have done. There's still much work that we need to be doing. Canada has been working with the U.S., as you know, on ensuring that that Canada isn't discriminated in the building of electric vehicles, as an example. But I think the broader issue that all of us have to tackle is how indeed we are able to, as reliable partners, able to create an environment that really will build the green economy of the future. That is very much what is before us.
All right, thank you very much. Reminder to use the raise hand function if there are more questions on Zoom. Okay, we do have a few more minutes, I believe, with the Mr. Yes, the Minister confirmed. So we would have time to maybe do a lightning round if you can maybe just limit yourself to one question. So Dylan, you can go again.
Hi, thanks again. Sorry, a question here for the Commissioner. I'd just like to ask about the Buy North American policy of the Biden administration that the Minister just mentioned. It gives Canada an edge over Europe with electric vehicles, and I'm wondering if you've asked the Canadians to help convince Washington to broaden the policy to include the EU, and if you feel like this is going to undercut friendshoring.
Indeed, as regards Inflation Reduction Act, I already mentioned the concerns which we are having, and indeed, maybe Canada is in a somewhat better position because, at least as regards those electrical vehicles tax credits, producers in North America are covered. That's not the case for EU producers. So we had been raising those issues prominently with U.S. administration, and we had created a joint EU-U.S. task force to deal with this issue. Actually, just after my visit to Canada, I will go directly to Washington, D.C., and we are going to have our next Trade and Technology Council in Maryland, and that will be occasion also to take stock how this work of the task force is going, and whether we are really arriving at some kind of solutions addressing the negative implications of Inflation Reduction Act on European producers. If we use, for example, this electrical vehicle tax credits or subsidies, for example, also many EU countries provide subsidies for buying electrical vehicles, but we are doing this in a non-discriminatory way. So if a consumer in Europe wants to buy Tesla made in USA, it's possible, and subsidy is still available. And it has its results. For example, in September, a Tesla Model Y was the most sold model of car in Germany. It would never be possible if we were applying the same discriminatory provisions as US is now applying against EU producers. So in a sense, we are asking that European companies and European exports in US are treated the same way as US companies and US exports in the EU. But clearly, this is an issue which will require further work and further outreach to our US counterparts.
We'll go to Zian Lum, then Murad, and then we will wrap it up. Go, Zian.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. This is a question to the commissioner ahead of Monday's TTC meeting. This is kind of similar to the question that Dylan asked, but I want to ask it in a different way. What notes or tips have you picked up from Canada on how to handle that hot topic of electric vehicle trade with the United States?
I think key here is engagement and willingness from the US side to actually address the issue. And while some aspects had been addressed in case of Canada and Mexico, of course, there are other aspects which are of concern, because the Inflation Reduction Act is not only about electrical vehicles. It goes also to other green technologies, batteries, renewable energies, hydrogen, energy-intensive industries. So it's actually quite broad-based, and it's underpinned by the same discriminatory logic. So there is a lots of work to do. Obviously, we are comparing the notes and comparing approaches with like-minded partners. We had obviously exchanges on this yesterday and today with Mr. Ng and also with Vice Prime Minister Freeland. Earlier this week, I was receiving in Brussels Korean Trade Minister An, also for our trade agreement committee meeting, and we're also discussing those issues. We know that there are other countries sharing the same concerns. So clearly, we are in a sense comparing the notes and looking for the best ways to address the issue and to at least minimize negative implications of this act.
Did you have a quick follow-up, Zian?
No, I don't. Thanks.
We'll go to Murad.
Thanks. Mr. Ng and Commissioner Dombrovskis, both of you have talked about the importance of human rights in trade agreements and trade relationships. Both Canada and the EU have recently relaunched negotiations on bilateral trade agreements with India. Last month, Human Rights Watch said there has been a, quote, serious regression in human rights and constitutional protections, unquote, under the current government in India. Given that, do you think now is the right time to be negotiating free trade deals with India?
Thank you so much, Murad. Let me assure Canadians and Canadian businesses that in all of our work in trade, it is underscored by the values that are important to Canadians. So whether they are values that support and enhance rules-based trade, standing up for human rights, you see that you see those features in trade agreements that we have negotiated. So the prohibition of forced labor in our supply chains, for example, in the CUSMA agreement. So what I want to do is assure Canadians that all negotiations are done with those values that are important to Canadians. And the other thing I would say is that that India, as the world's largest democracy, is share values of a rules-based system, and so our work and our relationship with India is one that is underpinned by those shared values, but to Canadians and to Canadians, I just want to reassure them that our negotiations always are underpinned by those values that are important to Canadians.
Approach in the EU is very similar when we are negotiating free trade agreements with any third country. We are also negotiating ambitious trade and sustainable development chapters in those agreements, which cover issues like human rights, like labor rights, also environmental issues. And that's going to be the same in case of India. And I would also underline our autonomous tools, which we have been developing during the recent years. For example, our due diligence instrument, which in a sense obliges companies to ensure that they are not sourcing goods and services with human rights or environmental violations. Our forced labor instrument, which prohibits the placement of in the EU single market of goods and services coming from forced labor. There are other autonomous tools. So clearly, the questions of human rights and labor rights are very important part of these negotiations. More broadly, I would say that following Russia's aggression against Ukraine, we need to rethink our approach to trade, to supply chains. In case of supply chains, maybe move away a bit from efficiency-driven model to resilience-driven model. And resilience, first and foremost, comes through diversification. So we are seeking to broaden our network of free trade agreements around the world and avoid dependencies developing. Like, for example, we had a dependency from fossil fuels and especially gas supplies from Russia. And right now we are dealing, and it's very complicated and costly to quickly, in a sense, move away from this dependency and move away from Russian fossil fuel supplies, as it's being used as a weapon of blackmail and manipulation by Russia.
Minister, Commissioner, thank you so much for your time. This ends the press conference. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.